Number one, the orange juice is not a juice being splashed, it's our company color. And I'm very proud that even our speaker badges are in the same color, so that's nice. I think sitting in the audience yesterday and, oh, thank you very much. Thanks. I hope I know how to navigate this. Sitting in the audience yesterday and today, one of the key things I learned is that much of what I'm going to talk about has already been covered to some extent, but not to, I think a lot of depth has gone into the presentations, but I'm going to take a step back and talk about the technology and what we need to do as a community and talk about a more industry point of view. I'm going to take more a stock-taking kind of point of view. Having been in the business for about 25 odd years, I'm no longer excited by these, hey, let's do this is the next new thing on the block. Everything has always been a next new thing on the block, and then we moved on to something else. So somewhere I come from that perspective, maybe cynical, but also much more measured. So I will talk about that perspective as well. As we go along, I will take some cases, I'll talk about some of the stuff that we are doing, and then later on questions of course are there. But immediately after the question and answer session, I have to rush back to the office. So you'll have to excuse me, no coffee, no questions over coffee will be possible. Last 2 days, all that we were talking about, online diaries, online communities, group discussions, depth interviews, video diaries, everything has been spoken about. Some of it has actually been done. People have talked about it. One of the key things is that this entire excitement around digital is being driven by the fact that we ourselves, as human beings and as consumers, have become much more digitized. The technology is now available for us to actually get into this domain, use this technology for research purposes. But more importantly, and in fact, if I listen to the discussions that have been had by client-end people, when I say client-end people who are sponsoring research, the excitement is far more with them. And that's the beauty about this particular technique. It allows clients and sponsors of research to get into the technique, understand it firsthand, rather than sit as observers or listen to a debrief, a cold, hard debrief at the end of the day. So that's the excitement. It's real time, that also helps. But what really helps is the fact that it's quick, it's real, it's something that you can see, barge in, log into the portal, and see what's happening. So that's the excitement. The entire thing is, of course, being driven by the digital revolution. The fact that there are so many more apps available, there are so many more, the fact that apps are available to begin with. In the old days, we used to work with a laptop and we had a desktop and we were happy with it. And then we realized there came Apple and the apps and now the Android Play Store, as they call it. And now you have all the tools available for you on the digital platform, whether it's the laptop or the desktop or a mobile device. So technology has driven this entire excitement and enabled us to do these kind of things. And that's why we are there and we're talking about it today. What's the biggest thing that happens when you actually do qualitative research on digital platforms is the fact that the consumer, the person, the respondent, is pretty much working within his own or her own world. There is no reason for that person to get out of that world, come into a room, sit for 60 minutes or 90 minutes, and talk about it, and then have his word relayed second hand to the client. It's all happening simultaneously. It's all happening live in reality. So as a result, this actually liberates the respondent of having to conform to certain kinds of norms that they have in their minds. For example, what kind of a person are you? And this is how we normally warm up in a focus group discussion. And when you go around the table, you get fairly stilted responses. Oh, I have one kid, I'm doing this, my husband does this, so on and so forth. But here, look at the kind of flavor you're getting out of this. Look at the kind of responses you're getting. They're getting into, I live in a great hot and humid city of Taiwan, not even Taipei, Taiwan. So with all its errors, it's giving you the flavor of what the consumer thinks of himself, herself. The consumer thinks he's suffering. Hot and humid is not a very complimentary word to be used for that. So these are the contextualities that we miss out if we were to do a normal standard focus group discussion and crunch the entire discussion in a 60-minute or in some markets 2 hours, that kind of a time frame. So it allows the respondent to be themselves. It allows them to talk the way they want to talk, and it allows them to express themselves and make themselves known in any way. So you start off with an individual kind of exercise, and then you can do more with it. You can actually complement the entire, in fact, I'll be taking you through a case study. You can complement this entire thing by making them upload photographs and all that. So what happens, for instance, look at the number of sunscreens here. Would you imagine that a single product would occupy so many variants in the same shelf? Or beer, which we always think is always stored in the fridge, it's actually in the pantry. And not only are you able to figure out what kind of a refrigerator they're using, but also what is being kept inside the refrigerator, and therefore what are they using it for. In fact, we recently conducted a very exciting study where we looked at fashion retailers and at fashion garments. And all we told respondents to do is, whenever you go out, wherever you are, whether not just go out, at home or wherever, take a photograph of yourself and anyone else around you, but don't take a face photograph. Just take whatever you're wearing and upload it. The kind of accessorization, whether they were mix and match customers or they were contrast customers, whether they were people who like to wear the most fashionable labels, or were they the kind of people who were quite happy wearing functional clothes. What kind of a personality did they have? Where else would you get that kind of richness if you were not to do that? So you can make them keep photo diaries or video diaries. In this video diary, in fact, this gentleman, I can't show you the video, unfortunately, because it's very, very client specific. But in this particular video diary, what this guy talks about tells you much more about his state of being, because he's completely bloated by that time, because he's had 3 beers, and he's talking, no, seriously. Then he starts talking about the beer, and then he elaborates on it. The more he elaborates on it, the more he starts getting happy about it, and he starts talking about it in very eulogistic terms. So basically, he's talking about low carbonation in the beer. But he then gets into his relationship with the beer, how happy it makes him feel, and so on and so forth. So we just let him upload it. Also remember, this becomes very useful when you're talking to certain kind of non-digitally savvy audiences. So when we do it with older people, when we do it with people who, like doctors, who are not used to texting so much, we make them upload video like this. Just take a video, say what you want to say, upload it. So it becomes that much more easier for them to connect. Then, for concept testing, we have a technology that actually allows you to trace out exactly what part of the concept is being looked at by the consumer. So if you can calibrate, and we do that sometimes, if you can calibrate the eyeball with the photograph or with the concept card, you can actually trace out which are the sentences that are being read twice. You have to do the calibration in the beginning, but once you do that, you're able to figure out which sentences are read twice and therefore are not well understood, which sentences are actually evoking some kind of emotion, because most laptops now have a webcam. So you need to then recruit those kind of people, of course, people who have a webcam if you want to capture the emotion, and actually understand. And then you can also ask survey-like questions about what do they think about it, what do they like, dislike, all those things. So what you're really being able to understand is, where is the eye stopping? What's it doing? What are the kind of elements that need to change? What are the kind of elements that are being ignored completely? For example, whatever's here in this part of the concept card, and we tend to fill up the concept card with everything in any case, whatever's on this part of the concept card and this part of the concept card is getting completely ignored. So do you want to use this space for a visual? Do you want to use this space for something else? Do you want to communicate anything at all over there? It's not even being looked at. And if you've got a visual over there, maybe you need to change it. It's not eye-catching enough. Or words and word clouds. Word clouds have usually been used, and in my past as well, primarily as a presentation device, to talk about it as how frequently each word gets mentioned. Yes, that is one of the functions of a word cloud. So this is the word cloud, typical word cloud. On the extreme left, this one is the word cloud. Yeah? That's nice. It's nice presentation graphic. It's wonderful. Wordle gives you free. So that's not a problem. What it doesn't tell you is how these words are linked to each other. What these words are meant to communicate. What is the contextuality? And what do they bring to the table, and how are they connecting to the main word that you're looking at? So what you now have is tools that actually tell you this word is linked to these kind of phrases. Okay? And each of these keywords, you can then, this on is the one that we've clicked on right now. If you click on, let's say, Auto, okay, then the whole thing would change to Auto, whatever Auto means. And if you were to click on any of these thumbnails, you would actually come to that particular word cloud and see exactly what that word cloud means. What this enables you to understand is the language and the connections and the channelization of the language that the consumer is using. What are the contexts that the client is putting this language into? And it's not purely a mathematical exercise of what is the frequency of mention of each of these words. And it's in that sense taking it one step further from mere text mining. Yeah? Let me take you through a small little case study on digital natives that it's an internal project that we did. Basically what we did was we went to young adults, youngsters actually, not young adults, but youngsters, over a 4-day period. They were free to log in and do those activities anytime they want. We did not put a restriction of, let's say, in the next 60 minutes do this, or the next 1 day you have to do that. There were some activities that were like, okay, who can do it first and who can do it, the first 50 will get an incentive and those kind of things. About 3,100 hours were spent by respondents on the project. It was about understanding media and consumer behavior in this digital age. And we deliberately went to the younger age group because they are the ones who actually adopted digital technology and are going to become consumers of tomorrow. Yeah, and brand decision makers of tomorrow. So these are the kind of people we'd gone to. And what did we learn from it? Okay, all through this research, let me just tell you, that in a typical focus group discussion, you would end up spending about a typical respondent. Some studies have shown that a respondent tends to spend about 9 minutes talking in an average focus group discussion. An average respondent spends about 9 minutes talking. In this study, we found they were spending about 2 hours on the platform in this thing. So the kind of responses we've got also are much richer. But what do we find at the end of the day? What we found is that we ultimately, as marketers, we'll have to start unifying the offline and online worlds. At the moment, there are 2 very distinct worlds in our minds: above the line, below the line, and website. That's how we actually look at it as marketers. We'll probably have to start merging the 3, start aligning the 3. And we'll come to another point about how mobile needs to be linked back to this as well. They are now seeking convenience and instant gratification. Time is not about urgency as much as time is about instant gratification. So they're looking for, give me something now. If I'm spending time now, give me gratification now. Stores are becoming contact points to check out products. Showrooms, not necessarily bought, but they're like, you want to have if you want to have a tactile feel, particularly for early stage consumers who are just about converting to online purchase, they actually tend to prefer the stores to go and do a tactile check, and then they'll probably order it online. Because ordering online is much less hassly, it's also more convenient, and also enables home delivery in many cases where you're not in a kind of location where you're going to be able to locate a store. Mobile devices, as a rule, are becoming extensions of the young adults, actually. They are beginning to see that as the way to express themselves. They are beginning to see that as the way they can mirror their personality. So they keep taking selfies. Someone spoke about selfies a few hours back. So those kind of things are meant to communicate what they think about themselves and what they want the world to know about themselves. And that's the reason why mobile is increasingly becoming the medium for us to reach out to this target audience. They trust honesty and transparency. So if you have a brand that turns around and says, we are good at this, but don't try to say we are good at everything. I'm sure you have something wrong with you. So you may not want to say this is where I'm bad, but please don't go about making very tall claims. And they actually turned around and said, some of the claims are completely unbelievable. I can't believe anyone can provide that at that cost. Yeah? Media consumption, and this is very interesting. Many of the shows are now being watched on the mobile device. So media planning itself needs to account for the fact that these shows are being watched on mobile devices, and therefore a communication has to be that much clearer to be able to fit into that small little screen. Also, when we do the planning, we need to remember that a lot of this is going to get watched on mobile devices, not at the time that it's being aired, but later on. And therefore, media measurement and those issues also come into play. That's okay. Yeah. I've said it all. And now the big thing that's happening, and which I think, where's Naveen? Here's the plug for you. This is becoming the other thing that we've been hearing Naveen at every opportunity he could get. He's been saying this to us. So we're talking about mobile devices and the fact that the world is going digital. But the honest truth is that we are yet to go digital. We still believe that an online questionnaire transported into a mobile screen is enough for us, which is not quite the way it works. Because the mobile screen is definitely a very different animal, and the interaction with the mobile screen is very different, and we need to recognize this in our minds as market researchers, and therefore go forward that way. Already, mobile research is going into these kind of things. Exploratory research, brand switching decisions. Just take a photograph and upload it. That's all you need to do to understand how people are changing the brand choices. Service provider and customer discussions. B2B research on mobile, digital mobile. I'm not talking about making a phone call and doing a telephonic interview. I'm talking about actually mobile research. A lot of the interviews, a lot of the information is already being collected on the mobile devices. But the challenge is to create an interface that is interesting enough, create an interface that is clear enough for the respondent to be able to look at it, get interested, get engaged, respond, and therefore enable your research data to be that much better. Let's look at this eating and drinking study that we did. It was about eating and drinking on the go by professionals, and the target group was obviously not very easy to get and was going to be very expensive if we went the conventional research way. So we went the digital way, and we used GfK's online app that actually is, we have something called Social On. Yeah, I'm more or less through. So basically it's something that's, and it's an app that's available on all three kinds of devices and all that. So what we did with that is we got about 28 people. We recruited 28 people. One person dropped out, so we ended up with a total of 27 people. Over a 4-day period, there were all kinds of activities thrown at them. About 9 activities were thrown at them. But the kind of output we got out of it was immense. It was 225 pages of output. And what did we learn from it? The kind of activities we made them was, first let us get to know you. What are you like? And people were made to describe themselves. What is the one thing you hate about yourself? What is the one thing you like about yourself? And because you're not doing it in a 60-minute time frame, you can actually go a little longer and ask a couple of more questions to shed light on what they are like. What do you hate about your body? What do you hate about the way you look? Those are the kind of things that you ask to understand whether they're diet conscious, they're look conscious, what kind of a consumer are you talking to. Then they were asked to take a bus tour. Take a bus to your favorite eating outlets. Not a bus down any particular route, but to your favorite eating outlets. Then some competitions. What are the top 3 things? Now. And the light starts blinking, saying in 5 seconds, how much can you answer? Now, these are the kind of things that excite a lot of the people. They make you do it right there and then instead of trying to wait till you get back home and do it. And basically quick polls that were thrown in at various points in time in addition to the activities. Sorry, please pardon my myopic eyes. So what did we get at the end of the day? Look at the kind of love letters they wrote to brands. Coca-Cola is nice and cool while it's cold with ice during summer. Okay? I get used to the taste since my childhood. I feel it's like a family drink. The affinity to the drink is not just about the fact that it's nice, refreshing and all that, but it's because you've grown up with it. And the whole family agrees with that particular sentiment. Or Lindt chocolate, similarly Red Bull, is all about giving me a refreshing feeling as much as making me feel like a winner. I feel like a stud, I feel like a winner, and that's why I'm there. The bus journey. Starbucks. I buy my chocolate cream frappe as my morning fuel. Fuel is the startup. Or salad stop to grab a wrap, Hans, and so on and so forth. So what did they go to? Now what this really tells me, if you look at the very last mention over here, that all these outlets compete not only amongst themselves in terms of what they offer, but also with the office vending machine and the pantry in the office. So when you are factoring in food options for your customers and for people on the go, you need to understand that they will also stop by at a vending machine and pick up something. Look at the photographs. And most of these people were asked about how diet conscious are you and how health conscious are you, and they were all very pontifical about, yes, we're very, very health conscious. We only eat healthy food. But look at the kind of combinations they're using. And this tells you so much more than a direct questioning. In a direct questioning, even in a focus group discussion, you would actually see very staid and very simplistic answers coming forth because there are 5 other people who are sitting over there. I'm not saying that it's going to be wrong. There are techniques to get under the surface as well. But this, without doing too much, is actually giving you that information. But the greatest gratification for us was the kind of engagement we got from the respondents. They really felt very involved in it. They felt engaged. They enjoyed the whole exercise. And they had lots of good things to say. They actually proactively wrote back saying, this is wonderful, because there was just a feedback button. And they wrote back saying, this is very interesting and we really enjoyed doing this. Great app, loved the session, the kind of words that they've used. Then, there's this new area of gamification. What do you do? There's so much happening in the games area that we as marketers can use and market researchers can use. So what do? There are these, there are many more tools, I'm sure, but these are the kind of tools that we've always started using, putting it into our qualitative research toolkit. So, describe yourself. And this is going back to Second Life. I don't know how many of you know about that. It used to be a hot rage at some point in time. Now I think it's cooled down because everyone's become anonymous anyways. But because of Second Life, we actually got into a game where we said, okay, you describe yourself. Picture yourself. Show yourself as you want to be seen by others. And it's a great new projective technique. It's a projective technique. It's basically a projective technique, but in the digital age. Or, you create your own comic. And you're providing the tools to them to create that comic. You're providing the pictures that they can start morphing into this particular screen to create that comic. They tell you the story that they need to tell you through pictures. And you don't have to be a great artist to be able to draw these pictures. You are enabling them with all these icons. Yeah, and then there's this question of, why do you even need to ask so many questions? Why can't you just go to social media and mine that text? And there was some very nice work done in an MRSS seminar here a couple of months back, where they talked about, they compared social media versus normal consumer research, and talked about how complementary they were. They were not replaceable, but they were complementary. So you can actually look at it. But there are certain challenges. So you can actually go through raw data. Everyone is pushing, all clients are pushing us into going more and more into insights. But more importantly, what's happening is, the challenge is understanding whether it's the Mars bar that they're referring to, or Mars the planet they're referring to. Are they referring to orange as a color, or orange as the fruit? Or the brand, for the matter. Look at this. It's so great that the UK Olympics are sponsored only by American brands. That's irony. Text mining tools are only now coming to grips with contextuality of text mining, and therefore being able to understand the difference between irony, sarcasm, and straight comment made about, or judgment made about anything. Is this a positive point of view? Yes, it is. For Germany, it is, but not for the United States. Yeah, so that contextuality as well, not just the contextuality of whether it's a fruit or a color, but also the fact that who is it that you are answering this question for. And these are fundamentals of measurement, frankly. Whether you like it or not, qualitative researchers don't like the word measurement, but all these are techniques of measurement ultimately. Case studies and all those things are sociological measurement, basically. To sum, therefore, we have now a fairly big toolkit. We have the tools to do everything. I don't think that's a problem anymore. But there are a huge number of challenges, contextuality, a lot of other things. I think by far the biggest challenge is our own mindsets. And I think mindware, software, hardware are not an issue anymore. It's really mindware where we are not being able to convince ourselves. There were some questions about how do we convince our clients about this, though it was about co-creation, but even about digital. Okay? I think at the outset, we need to be clear that this is the methodology. This is not the end-all. This is not the only solution. And you use it judicially when you need to use it. It can't be that you start throwing digital at everyone just because you got the toolkit with you. You have to decide when will a face-to-face interview be better off. When will the and remember one thing. This is in the context that the client gets very excited about digital all the time, because they see fast feedback, they see real feedback, and they see feedback that they can actually sit in and watch as it comes alive. So the challenge is our own this thing. The other challenge, the big challenge, just give me one more minute, is about scalability. The fact that most of the studies that we saw in the last 2 days are primarily about anecdotes. Basically, they were one case studies that they were talking about. The need is to actually build on this and to build it upwards to create a business stream out of it. Until then, it will just be an anecdotal case study. Will not go beyond that. So we need to figure out how to scale this option up. That will mean talent who can straddle the world of digital research, or digital and of market research. So people who are digitally excited and they know how to work the digital world, but also know the difference between prompting and probing. They also know the difference between a projective technique and an enabling technique. If you don't have that, you lost the battle right in the beginning.
Nehal, just a question, not on the mindware but on the software. Which are some of the better text mining softwares that are there in the market?
Actually, unfortunately, we have our own technology. We have our own toolkits because we have a technology backend. So,
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And I thought I was so nice to you and all that. You were supposed to ask questions. Yes.
I actually sharing the same spirit with you. I already did a WhatsApp study through mobile with one of our brave clients in Indonesia. And I think we share the same spirit with some other speakers during the 2 days. So I think we already arrived into the dreamland, which is mobile, digital, ethnography. So, yeah. But my next question is actually not only about the collective of, not only about the data collection, not only about the data taking, but analysis. Because we are dealing with oceans of data and everything else. So do you have any tips or structure on how to do the analysis on this?
Okay. Yes, when it comes to analysis, it's the same game as for conventional market research. So you still have to do content analysis, you still have to do all that. Unless you're talking about social media monitoring. In which case what happens, and text mining will help you, but text mining tools are not yet in that domain where they can automatically contextualize. You still need to run your eyeball over it and you still need to do that. You can train the software, but it still takes a few months before you do it. Right now, I don't think we have the critical mass of projects to be able to be confident about that training. So till we get there, I think it will take some time. But you still will need to, even after having done text mining, it's not a solution. You still, by the very fact that qualitative research needs you to look beyond the stated words and beyond the stated responses, I think you will need to anyway do content analysis.
It's a bit maybe also too optimistic to kind of expect that I think in Asia we'll have very good text mining solutions down the years because of like many language differences. You know, you have even, you go just next door to Malaysia, you already have the Malays, the Chinese, you know, you have different sort of dialects here and there. So I think in terms of text mining and technology, there's a very big conflict there because in one hand you need to have a technology that is scalable. On another hand, you have those small ethnicities that you need to deal with. So I don't think that's a feasible economical solution. Rather, you should go back to what the qualitative research has always done really well, is to code and to understand from a manual perspective. That's what everybody can do. You don't need to have specific technology for it. You know, you just go out there and be part of those conversations or observe them. So I think that's where, you know, just wanted to contribute on that fact.
You have the ability to assign a person in that country to contextualize for you and train the software in that particular language. Yes, and therefore, in fact, one of the points that I wanted to make was also that fact that at the moment it's still boutique and it's very anecdotal. The scalability is to do with the fact that can you take it to a broader audience and make it more mainstream. That's where I was coming from. But it will take time. Even then, for example, a Malayalam translation is going to take a lot of time before we get it completely right.